My life at that time could be called quiet and prosperous. My name is Nate Hardy. I am 36 years old, and for the last 7 of them, I have been married to Emily. We lived in our own small house in a quiet area of Milwaukee. Our house stood on a leafy street with low trees and neat lawns, a typical quiet street of the American suburbs, although the city center was 20 minutes away by car. We were satisfied with this measured life. Each of us had a job. In the evening, we dined together and shared the news of the day. On weekends, we went out into the city or received friends. Nothing unusual, just ordinary family happiness, as it seemed to me then. Every weekday started out much the same. I woke up early, around 6 in the morning. The alarm on my phone vibrated on the nightstand, and I got up quietly, trying not to wake Emily. She liked to lie in bed a little longer while I went for a run or made breakfast. I ran around our residential neighborhood, where at this time of year it was just beginning to get light. Sometimes in the winter, I had to put on several layers of clothing because of the biting cold wind from Lake Michigan. Milwaukee is famous for its harsh winters. But that autumn, with which my story begins, the mornings were fresh and pleasant. Golden leaves rustled underfoot, neighbors walked their dogs, the first cars flashed by on the way to work. When I got home, I would usually find Emily already in the kitchen. She was putting on a fluffy robe and making herself some coffee. As soon as I walked in, the kitchen would fill with the aroma of toast and freshly brewed coffee. I would make us some eggs or oatmeal, and Emily would cut up some fruit. We would sit at the small kitchen table by the window and chat about the day ahead. She would talk about her plans in her office. Emily worked as an HR manager at a company that made medical equipment. I would listen with half an ear, while simultaneously scanning the latest news on my tablet or my Facebook feed. I worked as an IT specialist at a large brewing company, one of those that made Milwaukee famous as a beer city. I liked the job, a stable salary, a friendly team. I sometimes joked that I had the most Milwaukee job possible at a brewery. After all, the city is famous for its beer traditions. After breakfast, we both got ready for work. I wore a suit, or at least a shirt and trousers. My company had a relaxed dress code, but neatness was encouraged. Emily usually chose business attire, a pencil skirt and a blouse or dress, complementing the look with a light scarf. She always looked neat and tasteful. I was proud of what a beautiful and intelligent wife I had. Sometimes we left together and dropped her off at the office on the way, if our hours coincided, but most often I left a little earlier. We had 2 cars, my Ford sedan and her compact Subaru SUV, convenient for winter roads. When we said goodbye in the morning, we kissed lightly, almost mechanically, as happens with experienced spouses. I wished her a good day, she did the same to me, and we went our separate ways. The workday flew by. As usual, I had meetings, email, programming, and solving technical problems. Emily and I would occasionally text each other during the day, short texts like, "How are you?" or links to funny memes if we had a free minute. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. I returned home around 6 in the evening. If Emily arrived earlier, I would find her cooking dinner, tomato sauce bubbling on the stove, or chicken roasting. If she stayed late at the office, I would be the first one home and start cooking something myself. We were not gourmets, but we tried to eat at home style, pasta, stew, salads. From time to time, we allowed ourselves to order pizza or Chinese food when we were both tired. Our evenings were also quiet. Over dinner, we would discuss how the day had gone. I would tell her about a bug we had fixed today, or how the boss had once again hilariously mixed up the monitor cord with the power cable. Emily would share news from her department, who had taken a vacation, how the meeting with candidates for a new position had gone, and sometimes she would complain about boring reports. We knew how to listen to each other, or so it seemed to me. After dinner, we would clear the table together. I would usually wash the dishes, and she would wipe the countertop and put the leftovers in containers. The rest of the evening, we would spend part-time together, part-time apart. We would curl up on the living room couch and watch the latest episode of our favorite show. For example, we were just finishing up a detective series on Netflix that we eagerly awaited every night. Other days, Emily would curl up in a blanket with a book. and I would go to my small office at the computer, either to work overtime or play an online game with friends. Sometimes we would meet up with friends. We had a couple, Jessica and Mark, who were also married, and we would take turns going to each other's house for dinner on Fridays. Or we would go to our favorite bar to cheer on the Milwaukee Bucks, our basketball team, if there was a game on. I remember Emily and I going to Pfizer Forum for a playoff game last spring and coming home so excited we were singing fan chants all the way home. In general, our life was very ordinary and, frankly, happy. It seemed to me that everything was fine with us. Stability, mutual understanding, common plans. We saved money for a vacation, discussed where to go the following summer. I suggested going to a national park somewhere in the West. Emily dreamed of a beach vacation in Florida. Sometimes the conversation turned to children. We were already in our 30s, and although we were still putting off having a child, we both understood that it was worth thinking about it in the next couple of years. There had been no arguments or dramas in our house for a long time, except for minor skirmishes over household trifles like everyone else. For example, I might forget to take out the trash, and Emily would get irritated when I scattered socks around the house. But all these were mere trifles that we quickly settled. I was sure that I knew my wife inside and out, and that we had a strong, reliable marriage that nothing could shake. Our daily life was filled with this calm and confidence in the future. If someone had told me then that this measured life would soon go downhill, I would never have believed it. In those autumn days, Milwaukee lived its usual life with cooling air, beer festivals on the squares, and a premonition of winter. And I lived mine, not even suspecting what a blow fate was preparing for me and how abruptly everything I believed in would change. The first warning signs didn't ring out suddenly, but accumulated gradually. At first, they were such trifles that I wrote them off to fatigue or temporary circumstances. Emily changed slightly, and at first I didn't even attach any importance to it. I started noticing oddities in the fall, towards the end of October. Emily had started a new project at work, and she was saying that there were more things to do at the office. It seemed natural to me that she might be more tired than usual, but there were changes. For example, Emily started staying late at work more often. Previously, we almost always had dinner together around 7 in the evening. Now, a couple of times a week, she would text me around 6. "I'm going to be late, don't wait for dinner, I have a lot of work." I would reply with something like, "Okay, darling, don't overload yourself." Deep down, of course, I missed our dinners together, but I understood that anything can happen, and it was probably temporary. I myself sometimes stayed late if there was a rush at the office. When she returned late, sometimes as early as 9 o'clock in the evening, she looked tired and distracted. I would meet her at the door and help her take off her coat. Usually, she was still wearing a business suit, and her face was noticeably tired. I would ask her how her day had gone, whether she was too exhausted. Emily would just smile tiredly and say that she dreamed of a shower and bed. I felt sorry for her. I perceived this as a result of stress at work. On those evenings, we hardly spoke. She would go to the bathroom, stand under the hot water for a long time, and then literally fall into bed. Sometimes I would heat up her dinner, but more often she would wave it off. "I don't want it, I already ate at the office." This rarely happened before we liked to have dinner together, but I told myself that work was work. Besides, the project was soon to end, and I hoped that everything would return to normal. Another subtle sign was in the way she started to treat her phone. Emily used to be pretty indifferent to gadgets. She would forget her smartphone in the kitchen or leave it in the hallway when she came home. Sometimes I would even tease her about it. "You forgot your phone again. Did someone call you?" She would smile and shrug as if it was nothing important. But closer to November, I noticed that the phone seemed to be glued to her. She carried it around the house with her, never leaving it unattended. Even when we sat down to dinner or to watch a movie, it was always lying next to her, face down. One time, we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, and I noticed that Emily's phone was constantly vibrating from incoming messages. I asked her then, jokingly, "What's with the popularity? Maybe you can share the secret of who keeps writing to you." I expected to hear, for example, that it was her friend Sarah or just a work chat. But Emily reacted somehow strangely. She shuddered a little, grabbed the phone, and quickly said, "It's just work, nothing interesting." And then she turned the screen away from me. I wasn't particularly alarmed at the time. You never know, work-related issues, I thought. But somewhere deep down, an unpleasant aftertaste remained. She had never made a secret of her correspondence in my presence before. If a friend wrote to her, she could comment out loud, laugh, and then suddenly such secrecy. Still, I decided not to make a mountain out of a molehill. Perhaps she had some personal matters to attend to or, for example, was preparing a surprise for me. I admit, for a second I was even inspired by this thought. Our wedding anniversary is coming soon, 8 years, or maybe she is discussing with her sister or friend how to congratulate me. This version seemed reassuring, and I tried to believe it. However, the oddities did not end there. Around the same weeks, Emily noticeably cooled off in intimacy. We had never been a passionate couple, everything was harmonious, without excesses, but there was a certain regularity in our intimate life. And then suddenly she began to avoid it. Sometimes she would refer to a headache, sometimes she would say that she was too tired after work. Of course, I did not insist. I always believed that such things should happen by mutual consent, but the refusals were repeated. Once, twice, a week, a second, nothing. I began to worry. Was she ill? Was there something she was embarrassed to say? One evening, when she once again turned away from me on our wide bed, referring to fatigue, I tried to carefully ask, "Emily, are we okay? You haven't been yourself lately? Maybe something happened?" She lay in silence for a few seconds, then sighed. "Sorry, honey. I'm just really stressed out at work. I love you very much, but I really don't have the strength right now. Let's do it on the weekend, okay?" I hugged her, trying to support her. "Of course, it's okay. Take a rest." But inside, I felt a stirring of uneasiness. No matter how much my mind tried to convince me that everything was fine, my heart felt that something was wrong. Emily's moods were also changing. She could be thoughtful and distant, sitting with a cup of coffee and looking out the window, as if lost in her thoughts. I would ask, "What are you thinking about?" And she would shudder, as if she had been torn from another world, and answer, "Nothing at all, just thinking." It wasn't that she had always been a cheerful chatterbox before, of course. Everyone has the mood to sit silently at times. But now this was happening more and more often. Sometimes, over dinner, I would tell her something, and I would catch myself not listening, her gaze unfocused, mechanically picking at her salad with her fork. "Emily," I would call then. She would immediately shake herself. "Sorry, I was lost in thought. What are you saying?" I would repeat it patiently, but a strange feeling of loneliness would grow in my chest, as if we were no longer as close as we had been. There were a few minor, unpleasant episodes. Once, on a day off, she suddenly said that she wanted to go to the lake herself, be alone, and read a book in silence. She had never expressed such a desire to be alone without me before. On the contrary, we always tried to spend weekends together, even if each of us was doing our own thing, then somewhere nearby. I was surprised, of course, but I didn't show it. Everyone has the right to personal space. Emily left for half a day, and when she came back, she said that she had a great time in nature and recharged her batteries. She really looked refreshed, even too much. I hugged her then and joked, "Maybe I should also go somewhere alone to look so good." She smiled somewhat guiltily and said, "Sorry, I just needed to be alone." Of course, I immediately began to assure her that everything was fine, you have the right. But all this was not like her. Gradually, these little things formed an alarming mosaic. I tried not to jump to conclusions. I convinced myself that the reasons could be very simple. Autumn blues, stress, maybe hormones or something else. I thought, maybe it really was an overload at work, the end of the year, reports, plans. I even once suggested, "Let me prepare you a bubble bath, and you can relax, take your mind off work." She gratefully accepted the concern, but there was still some detachment in her eyes. During those first weeks of suspicion, I never directly entertained the idea of cheating. It seemed impossible to me, uncharacteristic of our family. I trusted Emily. We had always been honest with each other, or so I thought. So I attributed any alarming symptoms to anything but betrayal. Sometimes I caught myself feeling anxious, but I immediately pushed the anxiety away. Everything will work out, I told myself. This is just a period. I need to support my wife, help her. I tried to be caring. I offered to help around the house more often, bought her favorite almond croissants on the way home from work, once sent her a bouquet of flowers to the office during the day with a note that said, "Don't overwork yourself, darling." That evening, she smiled gratefully at me, kissed me, and said, "Thank you, I really needed this today." But even then, her eyes seemed sad to me. Looking back, I understand that even then, in the fall, the first alarm bells were ringing one after another. I heard them, but I didn't want to believe them. As a person confident in the strength of his house, I didn't notice the small cracks in the foundation. But the cracks were getting deeper, and a serious test was waiting for us ahead. Despite all the warning signs, until a certain point, I had no real evidence that anything was wrong. I tried to believe Emily, convinced myself of natural explanations. But the inner unrest grew, and in the end fate, or rather technology, put everything in its place. I remember that day in detail. It was early December, a cold, gray weekday evening. Emily had stayed late at work, telling me over the phone that she would be home later than usual for an urgent project meeting. I was alone in our quiet house. The snow had already fallen in a thin layer on the streets of Milwaukee, and it was getting dark early. I heated up my dinner leftover lasagna from the day before and tried to distract myself with the TV. But my thoughts kept returning to the strangeness of the past few weeks. My heart ached with uncertainty and anxiety. At some point, I noticed Emily's iPad on the coffee table in the living room. She rarely used it lately, spending most of her time on her phone. The tablet lay unattended, the screen periodically lighting up with incoming notifications. I hadn't paid attention to her gadgets before. We weren't in the habit of poking into each other's devices without permission. But that evening, something made me pick up the iPad. Perhaps it was a nagging curiosity or a premonition that I could no longer ignore. I unlocked the screen with a swipe of my finger. I didn't know Emily's password, but for some reason the tablet unlocked with my fingerprint. We must have set up multiple fingerprints a long time ago so we could both use it. My pulse quickened as I saw the list of notifications. There were the usual app icons, mail, news, but among them I noticed several pop-up banners from a messenger. The messages were from a contact named A and contained short phrases, "How are you? Miss you." My heart stopped for a second and then started beating like crazy. I felt my fingers growing cold as they held the tablet. Trying to breathe evenly, I opened the messaging app. Emily's correspondence with a person listed as A appeared in front of me, just a letter with a period. The first thing I noticed was the fresh messages, which had arrived just a few minutes ago. A. How are you? Emily. Just finished my chores. I'm so tired. A. I can't wait to see you. I miss you. Emily. Me too. Very. I read these phrases over and over again, not believing my eyes. Who was this A? Obviously not a work colleague in a formal tone, the correspondence style was too personal. My heart pounded even harder. I scrolled up the message history, trying to understand the scale of what was happening. The correspondence had been going on for several weeks, maybe longer. Skipping seemingly meaningless phrases, I caught individual words and fragments with my eyes, which made my eyes darken. Here is a message from a week ago. A. Amy, yesterday was incredible. I can still taste your lipstick. I froze and then continued reading, overcoming the nausea. Emily, you're crazy. Be good, mister, and you'll get more. Then came smileys and hearts. My mind refused to believe that my wife was writing this. Line by line, the terrible truth was revealed to me. They were arranging meetings. A. On Friday at the usual place? Emily, yes, really looking forward to it. They exchanged frank confessions. A. I can't stop thinking about you since last night. Emily and I barely fell asleep afterwards. And they even discussed the details of how to deceive me. A, he doesn't suspect. Emily, no, I said we're in a rush at work. My hands were shaking as I read this. With each sentence, like a hammer blow, my old world was being destroyed. At some point, I realized that I couldn't breathe. I put the tablet down for a second and got up from the couch. My head was spinning. I went into the kitchen, drank a glass of water, trying to stop my knees from shaking. Everything around me seemed unreal. A quiet house, familiar walls, and in the midst of this ordinariness, I find out that my wife is cheating on me. This feeling can't be described in a few words, as if the floor had collapsed under my feet, as if reality was cracking at the seams. My throat was dry. I remember looking at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. My face was pale. My eyes were wide. I didn't recognize myself. A few minutes later, I forced myself to return to the tablet. I needed to understand everything to the end. Although part of me was already screaming that enough was enough, that it would only hurt more, the other part was eager to know the whole truth, no matter how bitter it was. I sat down on the couch again and continued reading the correspondence from the very beginning. The earliest message in history was dated back to September. Apparently, their relationship had been going on for several months. There was no overt passion in the first exchanges at first. They seemed to be simply flirting. They discussed some work-related matters. I caught that A was most likely Emily's colleague. There were mentions of office meetings, names unfamiliar to me from her department. Gradually, the tone of the letters changed. By October, the first hints of a meeting outside of work appeared in the messages. Maybe we can have coffee after the meeting? Okay, but only for a little while. My heart sank even more at the thought that this was probably when it all began. I kept reading, skipping the less important parts, and picking out the main facts. In one of Emily's messages in October, she wrote, "Can't stay out long today, Nate is waiting at home." Reply, "I understand. Too bad. Would have liked to spend more time with you." So she was already spending time with him after work, and she assured me that she was staying late on business. Memories flashed before my eyes. Those very days I was setting dinner alone, worrying about her, trying to support her. And she was not in the office, she was with him. Anger mixed with pain overwhelmed me. But I tried to maintain as much cold clarity of thought as possible. I quickly realized I needed to save this evidence. With shaking fingers, I took several screenshots of the screens with the most unambiguous messages where they confessed their feelings to each other, where they discussed meetings. Then, just in case, I forwarded these images to my email. My practical part of my mind already understood. The truth, the facts, might be needed. When I finished, I leaned back on the couch and covered my face with my hands. It was impossible to unsee or forget. The world in which my wife was faithful and honest with me had collapsed. What was left was a new reality. Emily was cheating on me. The person I loved and trusted more than anything in the world was leading a double life right under my nose. 1,000 questions raced through my head. How could she? Why? This had been going on for months. Had she really been pretending to be around me all this time? I tried to remember if there had been any clear signs before that I had missed. Every episode of the last few weeks now came together. Of course, this was what all those work delays were for. This was why she was moving away, why her gaze was guilty and her touches were rare. A flash of rage made me slam my fist into the armrest of the sofa. The pain radiated into my joint, but it was insignificant compared to the mental one. I don't know how long I sat like that in the empty house, stunned by the truth that had been revealed. Perhaps half an hour, an hour. I was overcome by a wave of hot anger, then replaced by icy despair. I clenched my teeth, imagining this unknown A, then felt tears welling up in my eyes from the feeling of betrayal. But most of all, perhaps, there was a feeling of unreality of what was happening, of shock. Eventually, I was brought out of my trance by the headlights in the yard. Emily had arrived. I flinched when I heard the slam of her car door closing. In a panic, I grabbed the iPad and quickly turned off the screen. Looking around, I made sure that everything was as it was. My heart was pounding in my throat. She must not suspect anything now. I still didn't know what I would do next, but I knew for sure I couldn't make a scene right from the doorway. Too many feelings were boiling inside me. I was not ready for a conversation. And besides, now I had evidence, which meant I could think about my steps. The door opened and Emily walked in, shaking snow off her coat. I heard her usual, "Hi, honey, I'm home," and I didn't believe I could answer in the same usual way. But I did. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I answered from the kitchen in my most ordinary tone. "Hi, how are you? Tired?" My voice was almost even, if a little hoarse. I was afraid to go out to her because I wasn't sure I could hide my expression, but I couldn't wait. I took a few deep breaths and went out into the hallway to meet her. Emily was standing by the coat rack, taking off her boots. In the lamplight, she looked as usual my wife, a little tired after the day. She smiled at me. "Are you still awake? I warned you that I would be up late." My insides sank from her calm, gentle intonation. What a deception these familiar words now seemed. But I kept myself in check. "Yes, everything is fine. I was finishing the lasagna. How was the meeting?" I asked, trying to speak as usual. Emily shrugged. "Oh, just a drag." I could barely keep my eyes open, and there was no tremor in her voice, no shadow of embarrassment on her face. She was lying like clockwork. I felt both scared and disgusted to see how easily she lied to my face. We went into the living room, and she, as if nothing had happened, began to tell some details of the meeting, what they discussed, who said what. I nodded silently, feeling that I barely heard her words. Only one thought was pounding in my head. Don't lose your temper. Don't give yourself away. Not yet. I knew that if I pounced on her with accusations now, I wouldn't be able to stand it. I'd say too much, maybe even yell, and most importantly, I wouldn't find out the details. I needed to stay cool. Like a robot, I played along, pretending that everything was fine. I even put my arm around her shoulders when we walked up the stairs to the bedroom, although this touch made me feel uneasy. That night, I lay next to her without sleep, staring at the ceiling and listening to her calmly breathing in her sleep. And at that moment, it was as if poison was spreading in my soul. I already knew the truth. But the question remained, what to do with this truth now? The next morning after that terrible night, reality hit me with renewed vigor. I woke up after several hours of restless sleep and lay there for a few seconds, staring blankly at the ceiling, trying to figure out if what had happened yesterday was a nightmare. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Emily was sleeping peacefully on the pillow next to me, her face looking calm and innocent. I looked at her and didn't recognize her. Memories of the correspondence I had read immediately began to buzz in my head. A painful feeling arose, as if there was a completely different person next to me, not the wife I knew. It took all my willpower to act normally. I got out of bed and went to the shower, trying to quietly come to my senses. Under the streams of hot water, I considered what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront Emily immediately, wake her up right now, throw all the evidence in her face, ask how and for what she could do that. This part of me literally screamed with hurt and anger. But another part held me back. I couldn't act rashly. I understood that in such a state I could say too much or only get more lies and evasions from her. Besides, I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I wanted, to try to save the marriage or not. Those first hours and days after the discovery were the most painful. I was torn between conflicting emotions and thoughts. When I came out of the bathroom, Emily was already awake and combing her hair in front of the mirror as if nothing had happened. She smiled at me. "Good morning, honey." I automatically answered, "Morning," trying to hide the tension. We went down to the kitchen to make breakfast. I felt like an actor playing the role of his own life. Here I am pouring her coffee, asking something ordinary. "How did you sleep?" And I don't recognize my own voice. It sounds even everyday. But inside everything is boiling. Emily was chatting about the upcoming day, about some kind of training in the office today, then a meeting with a new client. I nodded, agreed, inserted the usual remarks. Probably from the outside it looked normal. But each of her words was analyzed in my head from a new angle. Was it true or another lie? She was talking about her plans for the evening. It seemed like she was going to stop by the mall after work to choose a gift for her nephew. Before I wouldn't have doubted it, but now I immediately thought, is it really to the shopping center or to him? I became suspicious of every little thing. It was unbearable, but I couldn't stop. That day, while we were eating breakfast, Emily's phone was lying face down on the table next to me. It vibrated once an incoming message or notification. Emily glanced at it briefly, but didn't even pick it up and continued talking to me. I had to pretend I didn't notice either, even though my heart was racing. Who was texting her at 7:30 in the morning? I immediately thought of AS late-night texts and stared down at my bowl of oatmeal to hide the tension on my face. Before leaving for work, I firmly decided I would not do anything until I had collected as much information as possible and calmed down at least a little. This situation required a cool head. Already on the way, sitting behind the wheel, I spoke to myself out loud. Calm down, just calmly. You have evidence, time is on your side. Don't rush into things. I needed to understand the whole picture, who she was with, how far things had gone, what she was going to do next. I was in a daze at the office that day. My colleagues asked me several times if everything was okay. I must have looked like hell. I said I had a bad dream and a headache. During the break, I locked myself in the conference room under the pretext of a phone call and tried to analyze everything soberly. To begin with, I decided to find out who this mysterious A. From the correspondence, some of the messages hinted that he was her colleague. Snippets of conversations that Emily had once mentioned surfaced in my head. It seems that a couple of months ago, she talked about a new employee in their department or a related one. His name, if I'm not mistaken, was Alex or Arthur. That's right, there was a conversation about Alex from the marketing department or something like that. At the time, I didn't attach any importance to it, but now my heart sank. Maybe it was him. Both the letter and the fact that he was from their office matched. I opened the corporate website of the company where Emily worked. I found the Our Team section and scrolled through the list of employees. Yes, here it is, Alex Turner, marketing department. The young guy in the photo, about 30 years old, smiles with a toothy smile. I shuddered a little. If this is the same A, then he is younger than both of us, attractive. I felt a pang of jealousy and anger. However, I was not completely sure the name is common, and what if her lover is not from the office at all? I realized that it was better not to guess, but to gather facts. After work, I stopped at an electronics store and bought a small voice recorder, an audio recording device that could be discreetly hidden. The plan was simple and unpleasant. Leave this voice recorder in Emily's car to record her phone conversations on the way to and from work. If they were calling each other, I would be able to find out more. I shuddered at the very thought of being forced to spy on my own wife, but I felt that otherwise I would not calm down and understand everything to the end. That evening, getting home before Emily, I went out to the driveway and, under the guise of checking something in her car, we sometimes switched cars around in the yard, hid a recorder under the passenger seat of her Subaru. It was a small, black device, and I attached it to the seat frame with double-sided tape. It could record for hours straight. I turned it on and left it there. I'd put it back together in a few days. My heart was pounding as I fiddled around in her car, even though no one was around. I felt like some kind of intruder invading someone's privacy. But she had violated our trust first, I reminded myself as I slammed the door. In the following days, I continued to act calm on the outside, although inside I was torn apart by tension. I had to literally force myself to smile when necessary, sleep in the same bed with her, listen to her conversations, and at the same time know that it was all false. Sometimes I had weak moments. For example, one night, a couple of days after installing the recorder, we were lying in the dark. I thought that she might be texting him under the covers. She often reads something on her phone before going to bed. At some point, I really wanted to burst into tears or throw her out of the bedroom. But I clenched my fists under the covers and held back. I had to finish what I started. I listened to the tapes 3 days later when the opportunity presented itself. It was a day off. Emily had left on business in the morning. She said she was meeting a friend at yoga. I was immediately wary, of course, but I let her go without comment. As soon as she disappeared around the corner, I took out the keys to her car, got in, and fished the tape recorder out from under the seat. My hands were shaking slightly as I connected the device to my laptop in the house to listen to the recordings. In several files corresponding to her trips over the past few days, I could hear road noise and radio mixed in. I rewound the boring sections until I caught Emily's voice. She was talking on speakerphone, apparently in the car. My heart sank. She really was calling someone, and judging by her tone, that same person. The recording was from the night before last. Emily, hi. Yeah, I'm on my way. Tired as a dog. How are you? Pause, heard male voice, quiet, indiscernible, but obviously gentle tone. Emily laughs. Yeah, can you imagine? He didn't understand anything again. He thinks I'm going shopping, but I'm here to see you. Again, a male voice, a little louder. It seems he is asking something. Emily, at 10, no earlier. Yes, I'll try to get out early tomorrow. Love. Then there was a rustling sound. Apparently, she had pressed the end call button. My worst fears were confirmed. She regularly visited him, lied to me about the purchases. She even mentioned me in such a mockingly casual tone. Can you imagine? He didn't understand anything. This made my eyes darken with rage and pain. But now I knew for sure that A was her lover from the office and that the meetings were regular. The recording was terrible, but I needed it to finally stop deluding myself. There was no doubt. Our marriage was already practically destroyed behind my back. This thought brought a wave of bitterness. However, a certain cold calm came with it. It became clear what to do next. I turned off the recording, put the recorder away, and slowly exhaled. A decision was maturing in my head, which had seemed unthinkable just a couple of days ago. I no longer wanted to fight for a man who had betrayed my trust in such a way. It was time to act. That same evening, when Emily returned, I already knew that I would not have an emotional confrontation. I had a different strategy: to collect all the formal evidence and prepare for an official breakup, that is, a divorce. The decision to file for divorce had been brewing in me since the moment I listened to the recording. But before taking this step, I wanted to prepare everything and not regret anything later. Over the next few days, I busied myself with preparation, trying to cover everything. I copied her iPad messages to a separate flash drive, saved the most explicit screenshots with dates and contact names. I even printed out the phone bill from our family cell phone plan, which clearly showed that the same number, presumably belonging to A, was receiving dozens of texts and calls from Emily each week. I also found expenses on her bank statements that I hadn't noticed before. Dinners out on the very days she worked late, a hotel room in the city center for the previous month. It all fit. Every piece of the puzzle I touched fell into place. Each such piece of evidence was like a nail in the coffin of our relationship. Painful, that's not the word. But this pain had already turned into something else, into cold determination. I spent almost no sleep at night, but no longer out of helplessness, but planning my steps. I admit there were moments of doubt. What if I was making a mistake? Maybe I should have talked to her first, given her a chance to explain. But then I remembered her voice on the recording, full of lies every evening, and I understood. No, at least for me, this is unforgivable. Perhaps someone could try to forgive the betrayal, go to family therapy. But I felt that I could not live as before, knowing about all this. The crack was too deep. Thus, in a few days, I had done everything necessary to be ready for the decisive step. All that remained was to take it. My resolve to keep it all under wraps for the time being was soon put to the test. About a week after I had gathered my main evidence, Emily told me another lie, so brazen that I barely had the self-control to keep my emotions from showing. It was about a weekend retreat. On Wednesday, at dinner, as we sat at the table, Emily said, a little nervously, You know, our company suddenly organized a management training retreat at a country hotel. This weekend, I have to go. It's important for work. She said this, carefully avoiding meeting my eyes, as if she were afraid of my reaction. I put down my fork and feigned surprise. Oh, this weekend? Well, work is work. Where exactly should we go? Emily quickly answered. Some spa hotel near Madison, called Green Lake Resort. We'll be there for 2 days, from Friday to Sunday. I nodded, trying to look calm, although inside I was seething. Of course, there was no retreat, I had little doubt. Emily had clearly prepared for this lie. The name of the place, the details about the management training. It even seemed to me that she had rehearsed this speech in advance. For a moment, I felt a surge of hatred. How skillfully she weaves deception, telling me outright lies without blinking an eye. But I suppressed my emotions and calmly asked, well, I think it would be good for you to change the scenery. Do you want to go? Yeah, I guess it'll come in handy for work, she quickly replied, visibly relaxing, apparently pleased that I didn't object. I even smiled and said something like, sure, go and relax at the spa, why not? The words came with difficulty, but I was glad that I had managed to play the trusting husband. We spent the next 2 days preparing for her departure. Emily asked me to help her get a small suitcase from the storage room. I handed it to her and watched her pack it. The retreat is informal, jeans and t-shirts are fine, she explained, throwing casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater into the suitcase. I noticed that she had also taken her new swimsuit. There's a pool and a spa, I think, she commented with a smile, clearly trying to make the event look like a regular business trip with some recreational elements. I played along. Great, you'd even envy me. I wish I had such a team-building event. The day of her retreat arrived. Emily left for work on Friday morning with a suitcase in the trunk. According to legend, the departure for the training was supposed to be straight from the office after lunch. I kissed her at the door, wished her luck, and said, don't forget to tell me later how it went. She nodded. Sure, I'll write when I get there. Her smile faltered for a second, or so it seemed to me. Perhaps deep down she felt uneasy deceiving me so blatantly. But at that moment I felt no pity, only a cold anticipation of exposure. I took a day off under the pretext of personal matters, so that I would have some freedom of action. Around noon, I got ready to act. The plan was to first check whether the announced retreat even existed. I knew that it most likely did not, but I decided to make sure for the sake of order. I found a contact of Emily's colleague in HR on LinkedIn and wrote a short neutral letter, saying that I had heard about a training for managers this weekend, wished her luck, and casually asked if they often held such events. The answer came quite quickly. The colleague thanked me for the wish, but expressed bewilderment she had not heard of any training this weekend, and she would have known because HR usually coordinates such events. This confirmed my suspicions. Next, I moved on to tracking. I opened Apple's Find My iPhone website on my laptop. I had seen Emily's Apple ID password on her iPad earlier when I saved the conversation. Now I could easily log into her account. The service showed the location of her phone on a map. As expected, it was not near Madison at all. The dot labeled Emily's iPhone was slowly moving along the highway west of Milwaukee, but then it turned in the wrong direction to get to Madison or some Green Lake resort. I followed the route, feeling my heart beat steadily and coldly, adrenaline coursing through my veins. She was driving north toward the small lakeside town of Port Washington. There are definitely no corporate retreats there. It's a quiet tourist spot with a yacht club. I wasn't going to let her get away with this weekend. An hour after she left, I followed her, having previously checked the map for the approximate route. I periodically checked the tracker along the way. The signal showed that her phone was somewhere near a country road, then approached Port Washington. In the city itself, the signal stopped. Perhaps she had arrived. I approached, trying to keep to the speed limit, although I was impatient to catch them. As I approached the town, I felt my hands sweating on the steering wheel. It wasn't even jealousy anymore, but some kind of detached determination to see things through to the end. I parked at the dock, overlooking the waterfront and several hotels along the shore. Port Washington was picturesque and calm, clearly not a place for a business training session, more of a romantic spot. Gritting my teeth, I began my walk along the main street. I didn't have to look for long. Near one of the hotels, a small three-story building with a view of the lake, I saw a familiar figure. Emily. She was standing at the entrance with a man. They were talking, and at that moment he put his arm around her shoulders and kissed her lightly on the lips. My heart sank painfully, but at the same time I felt a strange relief. Here it was, confirmation in real life. Not correspondence, not a recording, but with my own eyes. The lover was a tall, dark-haired man of about 30, vaguely similar in appearance to the Alex from the photograph I had seen. Apparently, it really was him. Emily looked relaxed and happy next to him. I hadn't seen her like this for a long time. I watched from around the corner of the building, trying not to be seen. They took her suitcase and went inside, into the hotel. I took out my phone and, with trembling hands, took several photos from afar. One showed his profile, hugging my wife. Another showed their figures at the entrance to the hotel from behind. Perhaps I will never need these shots, but at the time I acted almost mechanically, as if recording evidence for the court of fate. When the door closed behind them, I was left standing outside, not feeling the cold of the winter wind. For perhaps 10 minutes I just stood there, looking at the sign of the hotel where they had just disappeared. There was emptiness inside. No tears, no hysteria, everything was burned to the ground. I was convinced of what I already knew. There was definitely no turning back now. I didn't make a scene, didn't rush in after them, or catch them in the act. Why? I had my own plan ahead, more calculated and official. I quietly walked back to the car and drove back to Milwaukee. The drive took about an hour, and the whole time I listened to the deafening silence in the car. I didn't even turn on the radio. I drove as if on autopilot, and the scene at the hotel played over and over in my head. The look on Emily's face when she kissed him. I tried to figure out if there was love there or just infatuation. What difference did it make now? I chuckled bitterly to myself. When I got home, I found a message from Emily on the answering machine on my home phone. We still had a landline number for banks and other formalities. In a cheerful voice, she said that she arrived at the hotel. Everything is beautiful here, a busy program. The connection may be lost, but don't worry, kisses. I stood in the hallway, listening to her lies with some kind of morbid cynicism, as if I was listening to a bad actress. Had I ever loved this woman? Of course I did. But the one I loved seemed to have disappeared, and only this stranger, lying to me in my wife's voice, remained. I spent the entire weekend alone in the empty house. Formally, I knew where my wife was at a mythical training, but in fact I understood that she was spending time with her lover. This realization was bitter, but I was already prepared to accept reality. I distracted myself with business on Saturday. I went to see a lawyer with whom I had previously arranged a consultation, discussed the process of filing for divorce and the necessary documents. The lawyer, a respectable man of about 60, listened to my confused story without surprise. Apparently, he had seen worse. He said that for a divorce in Wisconsin, it does not matter who is at fault. The main thing is to resolve property issues, etc. "Are you sure this is the final decision?" he asked me. I nodded firmly. "Yes, I am." We outlined a plan: prepare a statement of claim, collect the papers. In a couple of days, I was supposed to come sign everything and file a lawsuit. It was late Sunday night when Emily returned. I knew when she was leaving, of course. She'd texted me that afternoon to say it was over, and she was leaving Madison. Funny, considering I was in a completely different place. I didn't respond, just prepared to greet her at home. When she walked in, I put on my normal husband mask again. "Hey, how was it?" I asked as casually as I could, hoping that in the dim light of the room she wouldn't notice the tension on my face. Emily looked tired but pleased. "Oh, great, I learned so much," she babbled, taking off her coat. I noticed that she was wearing the same clothes I'd seen her in at the hotel. "I'm a little cold, I'm going to warm up with some tea," she said, and kissed my cheek as if nothing had happened. I resisted the urge to flinch. Her scent, the foreign scent of hotel shampoo or gel, hit my nose, and for a moment I felt sick from the realization of where she had been. But I forced myself to endure this moment. I let her tell me her prepared version of the weekend. How the lectures went. What a funny situation. There was in the evening by the fireplace with colleagues. How nice it was in nature. I barely listened, only occasionally nodding along. Inside me, the hurricane was no longer raging, rather, an icy calm reigned. I knew that very soon this farce would end. I needed to take a few more steps to prepare, and then I would reveal my cards. The lie about the retreat was the last straw, finally killing everything that was left of our relationship. Although after what happened I had almost no doubts about who my wife's lover was, I decided to clarify this issue completely. Perhaps I needed it purely psychologically to have a specific name and face in front of my eyes, so as not to be tormented by guesses. And for further steps, clarity will not hurt. On Monday, when the emotions from the ridiculous retreat had subsided to a cold, smoldering anger, I began to find out the identity of A in more detail. First, I remembered that I had his phone number. It showed up on the itemized bill of our phone bill, which I printed out. The number was a Milwaukee area code. I decided to call it from an unfamiliar number to check one guess. At work, I asked a colleague for his cell phone for a minute, citing the fact that I had forgotten mine on the table. I did not want to give away my number. I dialed the treasured numbers, feeling my heart pounding dully. No one picked up, but a minute later the voicemail turned on with a recording of the answering machine. "Hi, this is Alex. Leave a message." That was enough. An English voice with an American accent said the name Alex. My guess was confirmed. The lover really was called Alex, most likely that same colleague from her office. I returned the phone to my colleague, thanked him, and went into the empty hallway to catch my breath. Hearing his voice, even briefly, was strange. This Alex was a real person who was now living his own life somewhere, perhaps also going to work, smiling, not suspecting that I knew about him. Feelings were fighting inside me: jealousy, anger, some kind of morbid curiosity. I wasn't going to start a showdown with him, but now at least I knew his name for sure. After work, I sat down at my laptop at home and decided to look for more information about Alex. I remembered his full name from the company's website, Alex Turner. An ordinary, though quite common first and last name. But in combination with the city and place of work, this narrowed the search. On social networks, I found his LinkedIn profile, a standard photo in a jacket. A short biography: marketer, has been working at the company since this year. Before that he studied at Madison. Nothing is indicated in his marital status. I also found a Facebook account, although with most of the information closed. In the avatar, some beach, next to a long-legged blonde. My heart sank unpleasantly. Does he really have a girlfriend in addition to his wife? But upon closer inspection, it turned out that this is an old photo, and in the comments, someone mentioned Ashley's sister. Apparently, that blonde is his sister, and Alex himself is probably single now. This explained why he was so comfortable having an affair with a married woman. No family, and apparently no permanent girlfriend. I also found several group photos from various office parties where employees apparently posted photos. In one photo from the office Halloween party in October, I noticed Emily standing to the side with her colleagues, and nearby, almost behind her shoulder, that same Alex in a vampire costume. And they were both smiling. I don't know if their romance was already in full swing at that point or just starting, but in the photo they looked carefree and cheerful. I closed the image, feeling a bitter wave rising inside. Enough of this. I already knew more than I wanted. Now that the identity of the lover was established with complete certainty, there was no point in postponing an open conversation with Emily. I firmly decided, this evening we will talk. By that moment, all my emotions seemed to have been tempered into steel. The pain dulled a little and turned into a cold determination to dot the i's. Emily returned from work around 7 in the evening. I met her in the living room without her usual smile, with a serious expression on her face. "We need to talk," I said quietly, barely containing the inner tension. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. "About what, honey?" I gestured to the sofa. "Please sit down." My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat, but I tried to remain calm. Emily sat down, visibly wary. I sat down opposite her. We were silent for a few seconds. It was hard for me to begin. There was so much I wanted to say, and I had to find the right words. Finally, I began. "I want to talk about us. Or rather, about what's been going on lately." I saw a shadow of worry cross my wife's face. "What do you mean?" she asked forcefully. I caught her eye. Everything inside me was seething, but I tried to speak calmly. "Emily, I know everything. I know that you have another man." The words hung in the air. For a moment, Emily's face seemed to freeze. She went pale, then swallowed convulsively. "What are you talking about?" Her voice wavered, but she tried to remain confident. I smiled bitterly. "Let's not play. I saw and heard everything. Your delays, the text messages, this fictional retreat. I know about Alex." At the mention of the name, she flinched. Her eyes widened in fear. Emily was silent for a few seconds, realizing that there was no point in denying. Then she covered her face with her hands. "God." There was silence, broken only by our breathing. My wife sat opposite me, her face buried in her hands. I had almost no pity left, only weariness. Finally, she took her hands away, and I saw that her eyes were shining. She was about to cry. "Where? How did you know this?" she asked barely audibly, looking away. "It doesn't matter," I said curtly. I did not want to list all my findings, much less admit that I had been spying. After all, she knew that she was guilty. The details were secondary now. "How long has this been going on?" I asked evenly. Emily wiped the corners of her eyes and quietly answered, "A few months." Her voice broke. "Since September?" I asked. She nodded slightly and turned away. I felt my chest tighten with pain again. It meant that everything our family had lived for the past few months was now under a lie. "Why, Emily?" I asked the main question that was tormenting me. She sniffed. "I don't know. Everything is somehow confused." I remained silent, waiting for an explanation. Emily suddenly spoke quickly, haltingly. "I didn't mean to, really. It just happened. At first it was just flirting. I felt the attention. And you were always busy with your own affairs." She looked at me guiltily. "I'm not making excuses, but I felt lonely. Then it went too far, and I couldn't stop." I listened to her quiet voice, and strangely, no new anger flared up inside. Probably because by this point I had already experienced everything inside. I almost didn't even care what excuses she would give. However, her words about my constant busyness hurt me. "So it's my fault that you cheated on me?" I asked calmly, looking her straight in the eyes. Emily shook her head. "No, no. I'm not saying that. I'm just explaining how I felt. It's not an excuse." She lowered her eyes again. We both fell silent. I felt like this difficult conversation was about to end, and there was only emptiness ahead. There was nothing more to figure out. Everything was so clear. "I loved you, Nate," Emily suddenly whispered, unexpectedly switching to my name. Usually she called me by affectionate names or nothing. These words sounded bitter and hopeless. I noticed that she spoke in the past tense, "loved." Perhaps she herself did not realize it, but this was the final blow. "Loved?" I asked. "And now?" She didn't answer. That silence said more than any words. I looked away. My heart seemed to turn to stone in my chest. "Well, I guess there's no point in us continuing this agony," I breathed out. Emily was silent, then asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" There was fear in her voice. Perhaps she expected a tantrum, a scandal, or that I would throw her out right then. But my plan was different. "First, we will live separately," I said evenly. "I will move into the spare room for a while. Then we will see." These were not fully thought-out words. I did not intend to see further for a long time. I was already determined to get a divorce. But I did not want loud statements now. I needed order. Emily nodded quietly. She looked depressed, confused. I continued, "I think you should be alone too and think things through." "I guess. Yeah," she whispered. It was an unspoken agreement to take a break. It was the end, essentially, but neither of us had said the word divorce yet. It was too abrupt a step right now. Silence hung in the air. After a few minutes, Emily said quietly, "I need some space. I don't know what I'm feeling right now." It sounded trite, but I just nodded. Sure. I stood up. The conversation was over. "Let's live like neighbors for now," I concluded dryly. "As you like," she whispered back. That evening, I moved my things into our guest bedroom on the first floor. Emily said nothing, just quietly locked herself in our now her bedroom. I heard her crying there while I laid out my shirts in the new closet. I didn't cry. My soul felt like stone. Maybe the tears would come later, but not now. Right now, I felt only devastation, and at the same time, a strange relief that everything secret had become clear. There was no need to pretend anymore. After our frank conversation, a strange silence reigned in the house. Emily and I lived under the same roof, but it was as if we were on different planets. I deliberately kept my distance, protecting myself from unnecessary emotional outbursts. My approach was now strictly practical and cold. The morning after the conversation, I woke up on a fold-out sofa in the guest room. I didn't immediately understand where I was. The surroundings were foreign, the suitcase with my things was against the wall. Then my memory returned, and I felt a pang of pain, but I suppressed it immediately. There was a lot to do ahead. I decided to immerse myself in routine so as not to let my heart ache again. We ran into each other in the kitchen, silent. Emily was already dressed for work and was drinking coffee, looking out the window. When she saw me, she somehow cringed. "Hi," she said quietly. I nodded and muttered, "Hi." The conversation was not going well. I got a mug and poured myself some coffee. We were standing on opposite sides of the kitchen. Earlier in the morning we would chat, discuss our plans for the day. Now the silence hung like a thick fog. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "How did you sleep?" This simple, once caring question sounded pathetic and inappropriate. "Fine," I answered dryly. We avoided meeting each other's eyes. Soon she left for work, saying goodbye, "See you later," in such a timid voice, as if she was afraid to hear my reaction. I automatically answered, "Yeah," and closed the door behind her. My heart sank. How absurd the situation had become. But I kept a firm grip on myself. At work that day, I told my boss that I had a family emergency and might need some time off in the near future to take care of some issues. My boss patted me on the shoulder with understanding. "Sure, Nate, take some time off if you need to." I guess my pale appearance said it all. I was working, trying to distract myself with the tasks, and it helped to some extent. Although it was worth freezing for a minute as scenes flashed before my eyes. Emily with another man, her tears last night. I gritted my teeth and immersed myself in reading code, just to not think. After work, I stopped by the bank. My wife and I shared a savings account, so I decided to play it safe. I withdrew half the funds and opened a separate account in my name. It wasn't that I expected Emily to pull a fast one, but the lawyer's advice was, "Split the money for the duration of the case, it'll be easier." I also changed the passwords for my online banking and the shared cloud storage account where we uploaded family photos. For some reason, that last action especially struck a chord as a symbol of the fact that there was no longer an us, but a separate her and me. When I got home, I made a schedule for how we would use the house, so to speak, to minimize overlap. It may sound crazy, but I wanted to at least formalize our separate lives a little. For example, I decided that I would cook my dinner later after she had already eaten, so as not to cross paths in the kitchen. In the bathroom, I allocated a separate shelf for myself and moved my toiletries there so as not to grab the brush next to hers every time. Emily and I hardly spoke. Once she timidly suggested, "Maybe we shouldn't be so separate. Could we at least have dinner together and talk?" "I don't think that's a good idea right now," I answered coldly and left the kitchen, leaving her standing there with a confused look. I hardly slept at night, but I didn't rush about in despair anymore. Rather, I was going through my plans. My rational part completely took over. I made a checklist of things to do related to the upcoming divorce. Consultations with a lawyer, preparation of documents, assessment of our property, disconnection of joint services. I even sorted copies of important papers into folders: marriage certificate, house deeds, insurance policies. This helped me feel in control of the situation. Each check mark on the list meant that I was not falling into the abyss, but moving forward step by step. Emily tried to be as quiet as possible, as if she was afraid to provoke me. She slept alone in our bedroom. Sometimes at night, I would hear muffled sobs. Perhaps she was crying into her pillow. I would immerse myself in reading the news or watching meaningless videos on my phone just to avoid thinking about the past. After a couple of days of living separately, I noticed that Emily was almost never home outside of work. Apparently, to avoid awkwardness, she stayed out late, returning when I had already locked myself in my room. Whether she was really busy at work or spending her time, I don't know, where I didn't care anymore. One day, she sent me a text message during the day. "I'll be late today, don't wait up." Previously, such a message would have burned me with suspicion, but now I indifferently deleted it without even replying. I didn't care where she was or with whom. In those days, I kept a clear line. No aggression, no scandals, no showdowns. Everything had already been sorted out. I communicated with my wife in a polite, businesslike tone, only when necessary, to pass on a phone call to someone to check whether the electricity bill had been paid. She, too, tried not to say too much. It seemed that we were both waiting for some kind of resolution that was already looming on the horizon. The denouement was supposed to be the filing for divorce. I had an appointment at court for the end of the week to officially file the papers. I had the documents prepared by the lawyer in my hands. All that was left was to sign and register them. The day before, I had informed Emily of my decision. I did it calmly in the evening when we accidentally bumped into each other in the hallway. "Tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce," I said, looking her straight in the eye. Emily turned pale and leaned her hand against the wall, as if she had lost her balance. "I see," was all she whispered. I expected, perhaps, an objection or a surge of emotion, but she seemed dumbfounded. I, I understand," she added after a pause. There was a quiet resignation in her voice. I had nothing more to say. I turned around and walked back to my room, leaving her standing in the dark corridor. The last words I heard quietly behind me were, "Forgive me." I didn't answer. There was no anger or pity in my soul, only a cold feeling of the rightness of what I was doing. Everything was going according to plan, and I wasn't going to stop. The next day, I officially began the divorce process. That morning, as planned, I drove to the Milwaukee County Courthouse, clutching a folder of prepared paperwork in my briefcase. The courthouse was spacious and cool. The marble floor reflected the few people who were there. I felt a nervous tremor as I rode the elevator up to the floor. It seemed like only yesterday I would never have imagined that I would be here to end my marriage. But here it was. There was a friendly, middle-aged woman on duty at the divorce office. She looked at my papers and asked a few details. "Are you filing for irreconcilable differences?" she asked casually. "Yes," I nodded. "In Wisconsin, you don't have to state adultery or guilt. It's enough to state that the marriage has broken down." I signed the application and dated it. My heart sank. The reason column was blank: irretrievable breakdown, irreparable discord. For me, these words concealed betrayal and pain, but the court does not need details. "Your application has been accepted," the clerk said, handing me back a stamped copy of the papers. "There must now be a mandatory 120-day period before the divorce can be finalized. Your wife will be served with a summons." I thanked her and stepped aside, holding the copies in my hands. It all happened almost routinely, in a matter of minutes. I walked out of the courthouse onto the sunlit street and suddenly felt so weak in my legs that I sat down on a bench by the entrance. It was done. The first step toward ending our marriage. Instead of relief, I felt a sharp sadness. Although my mind knew the rightness of my decision, my heart mourned the loss. 7 years of life. Everything was officially falling apart. When I got home that evening, I found Emily in the kitchen. She seemed to have been waiting for me on purpose, without turning on the light, sitting at the table in the semi-darkness. Hearing my footsteps, she stood up. "Did you bring it?" she asked quietly. I stopped at the threshold. "Yes, in the morning," I answered shortly. She stood silently for a few seconds, then covered her face with her hand, and I heard her sob. She was crying for the first time since that conversation. She gave in to tears in my presence. "So that means it's all over," she whispered through her tears. It was hard to see her cry, but I tried to hold on. "Emily, you know," I said, more gently than I'd intended, "we can't fix this." She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "I know, I know," she kept saying. Oh God, how did we get to this?" She sank back into her chair, covering her face. I walked over carefully and sat down across from her. It was a rare moment when I wanted to comfort her, automatically, after all. For so many years, I'd been the one wiping her tears. But I held back. That wasn't my role anymore. "I'm so sorry, Nate," she said quietly, not looking up. "It's all my fault. If I could turn back time." I was silent. I had said things like that in the past, but what good did it do? "I understand why you do this," she continued, sobbing. "You're right. I ruined everything." There was a bitter hopelessness in her voice. We sat opposite each other in the dimness of the kitchen, and for a moment I felt sorry for her as a human being. It seemed that just a little bit more and I would be able to forgive. But as soon as this thought arose, the picture appeared before my eyes again. She with Alex at the hotel, her happy face with another man. No, it was too late. "What now?" Emily said, calming down a bit. "How are we going to get a divorce?" She said the word divorce quietly, as if she was afraid of it. I collected my thoughts. "Well, the usual. There will be a hearing in 120 days if necessary. But I think we can resolve this amicably. We have no children. We will divide the property." I said these dry things, trying to relieve the emotion. Emily nodded. "Yeah, I won't complicate things. We will do as you say." We briefly discussed the practical aspects. We decided that for now we wouldn't tell anyone we knew about the reasons. Let's say in general terms, we decided to separate. As for the house, it was still up in the air. Maybe we'd sell it later and split the money. Emily agreed to everything obediently. It seemed like she wasn't interested in the material aspects. She kept repeating, "Whatever's best for you." It was even irritating, as if she didn't care anymore. She had resigned herself to any punishment. At the end of the conversation, she suddenly asked, "Have you told anyone yet?" "No," I answered. "At work, they only knew that I was having problems at home. Friends and family knew nothing yet." "I haven't told you either," she whispered. We exchanged brief glances. In her eyes was a question she hadn't voiced. Would we tell the truth or hide the reasons? Frankly, I didn't want to air my dirty laundry for everyone to see. Divorce is a private matter. "No one needs to know the details," I said after a pause. She nodded, clearly relieved. Before we went to our rooms, Emily said quietly, "Thank you for even talking to me, despite everything." I didn't respond to that. I just stood up and went to my room. It felt unreal. Here we were, calmly discussing our divorce like a business project. And yet this was the end of our family. But apparently, that was the price of pragmatism with which I decided to end everything. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. The events of the day, filing the application, Emily's tears, our quiet conversation played over in my head. I felt sad, but there was no turning back. Somewhere deep inside, there was relief. The worst was over, the secret was gone, there was certainty ahead. But the bitterness of loss was still there. I suppose it's always like that. Even when you do the right thing, your heart can ache. I stared at the dark ceiling and slowly realized we had officially entered the process of ending our marriage. Now all that was left was to see it through to the end. A couple of weeks after filing the paperwork, Emily and I barely saw each other. She went to her parents' place in the suburbs for a few days, apparently to get away from the oppressive atmosphere of our home. I didn't mind, it was even better that way. During this time, we exchanged only a few messages about everyday matters. Our house was quiet, as if deserted. One afternoon, I received a text from her. Can we meet and talk outside the house? My heart sank. I didn't know what she wanted to discuss, maybe the formalities of the divorce, or maybe something else. I agreed. We agreed to meet in the evening at a cafe near our house, where we used to like to have breakfast on weekends. I arrived early and took a table in the corner. It was strange to wait for my wife, as if I were meeting her blindly. Thoughts swarmed in my head. What does she want to talk about? Is she really hoping for something? I was determined. No false hopes. Emily walked in, looked around, and came to the table. She looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes. Her face was pale. Sitting down opposite me, she tried to smile, but it came out sad. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," I answered. We were silent for a while, not knowing where to start. The waitress came. We ordered coffee. The scene seemed painfully familiar, and at the same time alien. So many times we sat here, chatting about nothing, and now like this. Emily finally spoke, looking at her cup. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I nodded. She swirled the spoon in her coffee and continued. "I wanted to. I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't have. I just wanted to tell you something in person." I tensed up inside. Emily looked up at me, tears glistening in her eyes. "I broke up with Alex." She paused, letting me digest the information. I remained silent, unsure of what to say. Right after our conversation back then, I told him everything and I'm not seeing him anymore, she added. I noticed her hands shaking as she wrapped them around her cup. "It doesn't matter to me anymore," I finally answered honestly. Emily smiled sadly through her tears. "I know. I understand. I just wanted you to know. It's not about him. Or rather, not about him anymore. It's over between us." I nodded, taking note. A belated thought flashed through my mind. She had lost both her husband and her lover. But I pushed it away. I felt no malice, only bitterness. "I don't ask for anything more," she continued quietly. "I know I've broken your trust forever, but I'll probably regret it for the rest of my life." Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she wiped them away with a napkin. I felt a lump in my throat, too. Despite everything, it hurt me to see her so broken. "I'm sorry about it, too," I finally said, "but we can't go back." Emily nodded, closing her eyes. "Yeah, I just wanted you to hear that I'm sorry, and thank you for all these years." Her voice broke. The waitress tactfully didn't approach us again, seeing our state. We were silent for a while, letting ourselves calm down. Then I decided to clarify. "Did you want to discuss something about the divorce?" She shrugged. "No, it's all clear. I've already found myself a lawyer, just to check the documents, but I won't argue for anything." "Okay," I answered. The questions dried up. Emily suddenly looked me straight in the eyes. "Nate, you're not leaving us a chance, are you?" Her gaze was full of longing. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, but I shook my head. "I'm sorry, I can't forget." She looked down, expecting such an answer. "I understand," she whispered. We finished our cold coffee. It was time to leave. We stopped on the sidewalk as we left the cafe. It was a cool spring evening, and it was getting dark. "Take care," I said quietly, looking at her. Emily nodded. "And you?" We had nothing more to say to each other. We stood there hesitating, like two acquaintances saying goodbye after a chance encounter. For a moment I wanted to hug her goodbye, but I held back. Instead, I just lightly touched her shoulder with my hand. She looked at me through her tears and turned to go. I watched her walk away down the street, huddled in her coat. At one point, she glanced back, perhaps hoping I would stop her. But I didn't move. Then she turned away and quickened her pace. Thus ended our personal meeting quietly, sadly, and finally. I returned to the car with a heavy heart. Deep down, I knew I had done the right thing, but that knowledge did not make it any easier. The divorce was in full swing, and there was no turning back. Some time after our separation, I had to talk to Emily's parents. They had always treated me warmly. I was like a son to them, because Emily had no brothers. I guessed how difficult it would be for them to find out about our divorce. One evening, about 2 weeks after filing the application, my mobile phone rang. It was Emily's mother, Carol. Nate, hello, it's Carol, came a familiar, soft voice on the other end of the line, though there was a note of worry in it. Hello, Carol, I answered, trying to remain calm. She paused, as if choosing her words. We've been. Emily told us everything, she finally said, her voice shaking. My heart sank. I understand, I said quietly. Carol sniffled. Can we see each other? Can we talk? Henry, Emily's father, and I are really worried. The next day, I stopped by their house. It was the same house in the suburbs where Emily went to escape stress. I remembered that cozy house with the porch where we used to drink lemonade on summer evenings. How different everything is now. I was met at the door by Carol and Henry. Emily's mother immediately hugged me, and I could tell she was crying. Nate, my dear boy, was all she could say. My own eyes stung, and I hugged her back tightly. Hello. Emily's father, usually reserved, shook my hand and patted me on the shoulder. Hello, son. I could tell from his face that he, too, was deeply distressed. We walked into the living room. Carol brought the tea, though her voice was shaking. We sat in near silence for a few minutes. Finally, Henry sighed and spoke. Emily told us about what happened. We don't even know what to say. Forgive us. We had no idea. He looked down, and I noticed the moisture in his eyes. It's not your fault, I shook my head. This is between Emily and me. Carol clasped her hands. I just don't understand how this happened. We always thought you were happy. I smiled bitterly. I thought so too. The words hung in the air. Emily's mother shook her head, wiping away tears. Nate, you were the best husband anyone could ever ask for. We always loved you like our own. Believe me, we are terribly ashamed of Emily. She couldn't finish, her voice breaking off into a sob. I took her hand in mine. Please don't. I beg you, don't blame yourself and don't scold her too much. She's an adult and is responsible for her own actions. I didn't want them to shower their daughter with curses. What's done is done. Henry nodded grimly. Of course, but she'll have to live with the consequences. He looked at me carefully. We understand your decision, son. No one blames you. You're doing the right thing. These words brought a lump to my throat. I barely managed to squeeze out, thank you. We talked about the future for a few minutes. I said I hoped to do this in a civilized manner without any dirt. They nodded. If anything, we're on your side. I thanked them, but said I hoped there would be no feud. Carol asked quietly, You will never be able to forgive her? A faint hope gleamed in her eyes. I looked at the floor and shook my head. I'm afraid not. She covered her face with her hands, crying quietly. What a pity. What a pity. Eventually, the conversation came to an end. We were all emotionally exhausted. I stood up, and Emily's parents did too. I don't know what we're going to do next. Carol began, and Henry wrapped his arm around her shoulders and finished. But we want you to know that you'll always be family to us, no matter what happens between you. My lips began to tremble. All I could do was nod. Carol hugged me tightly again. Take care of yourself, Nate. Forgive our girl, at least in your heart, for your own peace of mind. I remained silent, clenching my jaw to keep from bursting into tears. I'll try, I breathed out. I said goodbye and went out. As I was getting into the car, I saw Emily's parents standing by the door, huddled close to each other, watching me go. This was probably our last meeting in this capacity. I drove off the familiar street with a heavy heart. I felt sorry for these kind people, worried about our drama. At that moment, I firmly decided that I would never allow myself to speak ill of Emily in front of anyone so as not to hurt her family more. They did not deserve to suffer more. Gradually, the news of our divorce spread through our social circles. It was a painful process of explaining what was happening to the people around us. Emily and I didn't make any public announcements, but close friends and neighbors soon noticed the changes. The first thing I did was tell our closest friends, Mark and Jessica. We had been family friends for years, going on vacations together, sharing joys. Inviting them over one evening, Emily was out that day. I struggled to find the words. Emily and I have decided to break up. Jessica gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. Mark's eyes widened. What? Shit, Nate, what happened? I clutched a glass of water, feeling my throat tighten again with shame and pain. Emily cheated on me, I decided to say directly. I saw no point in making up excuses. Silence fell in the living room. Jessica couldn't take it anymore and hugged me. My dear, I'm so sorry. Mark cursed under his breath and slapped his knee. Oh shit. They started asking when and how. I briefly answered that several months had passed, without going into details. The friends were shocked. Jessica threw up her hands. And I thought you were doing well. Emily never. Oh, Mark shook his head. You never know people. They supported me as best they could. Mark said that if I needed help with moving or anything else, they were there. Jessica cried almost as much as Emily's mother. I can't believe it. God, how you must have suffered all this time. I just shrugged tiredly. It's better now than before. We talked for a long time. They tried to cheer me up, although they were shocked. Jessica admitted that she noticed in recent months that Emily had become distant. I thought she was depressed or stressed, but I couldn't imagine it. In the following days, I had to answer calls from other friends with whom Mark and Jess had shared the news. Everyone reacted in roughly the same way: disbelief, shock, sympathy for me, and, sometimes, anger at Emily. I even began to defend her automatically. Don't be too angry with her, this is how it happened between us. Deep down, I didn't want to turn her into a complete monster in the eyes of our mutual friends. However, some of my friends, especially men, directly said, "Don't you dare think about forgiving her, she doesn't deserve it." I didn't intend to. There were also issues with the neighbors. Our neighbor across the street, Mr. Reynolds, saw me alone at the mailbox one morning and asked in a friendly tone, "How's Emily? I haven't seen her in a while." He was about 70 and liked to chat. I hesitated, then answered bluntly, "Emily doesn't live here anymore. We're getting a divorce." The old man was taken aback. "Oh, I'm so sorry, son." He shook his head in shock. "If you need any help, just ask." The neighbor on the other side, Mrs. Paulson, was also involved. She caught me in the parking lot one day and, lowering her voice, asked, "Honey, are you and Emily okay? I heard you broke up." Apparently, rumors had already started spreading down the street. I answered dryly, "We broke up, yes." Mrs. Paulson lamented, "What a pity. They were such a good couple." I had to listen to a few routine phrases about how life is complicated and everything will work out. I thanked her for her concern and hurried home. At work, I had to explain myself too. I had already taken time off to meet with a lawyer and go to court, so my boss and colleagues knew I had problems. After I filed, I told the department myself that I was going through a divorce. At first, people were stunned. Many knew Emily and me as a strong couple. They had seen her at company parties. One colleague even blurted out, "Oh, come on." "Why?" I just joked. "We just didn't get along." I didn't want to discuss personal matters. Most were tactful. They limited themselves to sympathetic nods and offers to have a beer after work. One colleague, with whom I often had lunch, quietly asked me over a cup of coffee. "Because of what, if it's not a secret?" I shrugged. "The usual story, infidelity." He let out a long sigh. "Dude, hang in there." "Yeah, I'm coping," I replied. And it was true, I was coping. I felt that I had changed somewhat in the eyes of those around me. Some looked at me with pity, some with awkward interest. In the office, they were probably whispering behind my back. At some point, it bothered me. Was I really an object of pity now? But soon I realized that many people go through this, nothing special. And it's better than pretending to be happily married in public when everything is ruined. Emily and I did some house cleaning on social media too. I changed my relationship status on Facebook to divorced. Half a dozen people immediately wrote me a private message. "Oh no, is that true?" I had to respond briefly. "Yes, that's how it happened." Emily and I agreed not to badmouth each other publicly. She removed our joint photos from her profile, stopped tagging us as married. A couple of curious friends even asked me directly, "What happened?" But I answered with generalities. Fortunately, after a while, the excitement died down. Overall, this period of social aftermath was difficult. Every phone call or conversation reopened the wound. But surprisingly, I also felt support that I hadn't thought about before. Some friends invited me to a bar to unwind, others to go jogging together on weekends so I wouldn't sit alone. Coworkers at work started inviting me to play table tennis after the office. Even the neighbors invited me to a barbecue a couple of times, so you wouldn't get bored. At first, I refused, but then I began to accept these gestures. They really helped. I realized that there were a lot of people around who cared, and that warmed my heart. Of course, there were curious characters who would ask questions out of idle interest. But I quickly learned to stop such conversations. After all, the details are our business alone. One way or another, by mid-spring the wave of gossip had died down. Everyone close to us knew that we were getting divorced and accepted it as a fact. Life around us went on as usual, and gradually the topic of my divorce ceased to be the number one news item. And I felt relief in this. The world hadn't collapsed, my status in it had simply changed. Left alone, I was faced with a new reality, learning to live without the partner I had been with for 7 years. The first weeks after Emily left were the hardest. The house felt empty and quieter than ever. I caught myself doing little things, reaching for 2 coffee mugs in the morning. Why, now one is enough. Coming home from work and automatically wanting to shout, "Hey, I'm home!" But there was silence. These moments were a painful prick of understanding. Everything had changed. In the first days of loneliness, I literally wandered around the house in the evenings, not knowing what to do with myself. Before, Emily and I would watch a movie or discuss the day, but now the hours dragged on. I read the news, scrolled through social media feeds, mindlessly switched channels. Sleep also became a problem. I could no longer sleep in our bedroom, too many memories. I continued to sleep in the guest room, gradually settling into it as a new den. I changed the bed linen for new ones, put my books on the nightstand. This helped create a sense of my own space, not filled with the ghosts of the past. Gradually, I developed new habits to structure my life. I joined a gym near work. Emily and I used to start and stop going together, but now I went regularly, 5 times a week after the office. Physical activity was a great distraction. When I came home tired, I at least fell asleep easier. I resumed morning jogging on weekends, the same ones I had abandoned in the fall when all the worries began. Running in the cool park was a wonderful way to put my thoughts in order. I had more time for everything. I finally sorted out the garage, which I hadn't gotten around to for several years, sorted through the papers, digital photos scattered across different disks, and put them in order. This meticulous orderliness of life seemed to compensate for the chaos in my soul. There were, of course, setbacks. Sometimes in the evening, sitting in the empty living room, I would suddenly feel such a sharp longing that I wanted to howl. I didn't miss the person Emily had become, but rather the comfort we once had. The very feeling of being close to someone. As soon as an advert with a happy couple or a family sitcom appeared on the TV, a wave of sadness washed over me. I would turn everything off and just sit in silence, letting the tears flow if they came. And they did. Not as often as you might think, but there were moments when the tears flowed. But each such episode seemed to cleanse me. Gradually, I felt better. Lonely dinners at the kitchen table became a kind of therapy for me. At first, I hardly cooked. I ate whatever came to hand, not wanting to fuss around at the stove for one person. But my friends insisted, "Don't let yourself go." Jessica taught me a couple of simple recipes for one. Mark gave me a grill pan for a bachelor. I mastered cooking steaks and grilled vegetables, learned how to cook soup for one meal. It turned out that it was even exciting for the first time, cooking exclusively for my own tastes, without looking back at anyone else. I also allowed myself to return to the hobbies I had once abandoned. I took my guitar off the shelf in my youth. I strummed for the soul, but after getting married, I somehow couldn't find the time. Now in the evenings, I would sometimes strum the strings, recalling old melodies. It brought on a slight sadness, but it also calmed me down. I also signed up for a digital photography course, which I had long dreamed of. Every Wednesday after work, I went to the city educational center, where a small group of us enthusiasts learned to handle the camera in manual mode. I immersed myself in the creative activity and forgot about everything for a couple of hours, the best therapy. My emotional state gradually stabilized. I began to value silence and solitude not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to be with myself. I started keeping a diary on the advice of the same Jessica. At first I was skeptical, but I tried it and got into it. In the evening, I wrote down what I felt during the day, what new things I did. This helped me to throw out my experiences on paper rather than keep them inside. Of course, sometimes there were heavy thoughts. At night, I would lie and replay the past. When did it all go wrong? Could I have prevented it? But gradually, I stopped blaming myself. I honestly did everything I could, and the blame does not lie with me alone. Realizing this was an important step. I stopped waking up in the middle of the night from nightmares, as I had in the beginning, when I dreamed that I was discovering betrayal again. My sleep became more even, albeit sensitive. By the beginning of the summer, I already felt that I could look to the future without that sharp lump of pain inside. Ahead was still the finalization of the divorce, the division of property, the housing issue. But emotionally, I was stronger. I learned to live with thoughts of Emily without a sharp wound. Now it was sadness, but bearable. Sometimes I remembered good moments, our trip to the national park, or how we laughed until tears at a stupid comedy. I allowed myself these bright memories, although they tasted bitter. But I did not want to erase 7 years of life, completely let them remain as an experience, no matter how difficult it was. So step by step, I got used to the new life. No longer we, but I. It was scary, but it also opened up new horizons. I was almost 37, and life was not over. I convinced myself of this. Every day, setting small goals for myself and achieving them, I felt, I am coping. Loneliness gradually turned from an enemy into my teacher. I learned a lot about myself, understood how much stronger I was than I thought. And although there were still legal formalities ahead and a final point to be made, I was already emotionally ready for this. The formal end of our marriage came in the summer, a few months after we filed. The statutory 120-day waiting period had expired, and we were scheduled for a final court hearing. By then, Emily and I had already settled the settlement. We had agreed to sell the house and split the proceeds equally, and the bank accounts and property were amicably distributed. No alimony, no debts, relatively simple. On the day of the trial, I felt strangely calm, as if all the tears and worries were behind me. Emily and I arrived separately. In the courtroom hallway, I saw her standing outside the courtroom in a formal gray suit, reserved and sad. I nodded hello, and she smiled shyly. "Hi, Nate," she said quietly. "Hi," I replied. No more words were needed. We walked into the courtroom in silence. The judge was an elderly man with a kind, if tired, face. The procedure was short and almost routine. He asked a couple of questions. Did we confirm our mutual consent to divorce? Were there any property disputes? Was everything settled? We answered in monosyllables, "Yes, Your Honor." I was amazed at how easily something that once seemed indestructible could crumble. In the end, the judge said, "The marriage is dissolved." The gavel struck, and that was it. We were no longer officially husband and wife. Emily lowered her head. I heard her quiet sob. My chest was also aching, but there were no tears. I must have cried too much in advance. Having received a copy of the divorce certificate, we went out into the hallway. We lingered next to each other for a few seconds, not knowing how to say goodbye. "Well, good luck to you, Emily," I said, feeling strangely awkward. She looked at me with eyes full of tears and whispered, "And to you, Nate, you deserve to be happy." I nodded gratefully. We shuffled a little, then she suddenly stepped closer and lightly hugged me. I allowed myself to hug her back one last time. This hug was farewell, wordless. Then we both let go of each other at once. Emily apologized again with just her lips and hurried away down the hall, covering her face with her hand. I watched her go, realizing that this was the final point. As I left the courthouse, I took a deep breath of the warm summer air. The sun was blinding my eyes, and I had to squint. My soul felt quiet and empty, but not mortally painful as before. Rather, it was like after a long illness when you are still weak, but already clearly feel that recovery is ahead. I sat on the courthouse steps, as I once did on the day I filed my application. But this time, something new was growing in my chest, a timid feeling of freedom and hope. The divorce was officially over. 7 years of marriage were behind us, now in the category of memories and experiences. I was ready to turn the page. Of course, there was still a lot to do: sell the house, build a new life. But I already knew I could handle it. I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and walked to the car. Life went on. For the first time in months, I found myself thinking not about the past, but about what was waiting for me next. And although my heart still bore scars, it was still able to beat for the future, for the new life that was beginning for me from this day. After some time, I finally settled into my new life. Emily and I put our house up for sale, and by the end of the summer, it had found new owners. As I closed the door behind me for the last time, I didn't feel any acute regret. Rather, I felt gratitude to this house for the good memories and relief that I was leaving a place where there had been so much pain. I moved my things to a cozy rented apartment closer to the city center. A small, bright apartment on the third floor of an old brick house was not at all what I was used to in the suburbs, but the change of scenery was good for me. I was starting from scratch. The new apartment quickly settled into my habits. In the hallway, there were only my shoes. In the closet, there were my clothes. I chose the color of the curtains and the dishes myself before. Emily decided more on such trifles, but now I learned to arrange my life for myself. It turned out that I liked this process. I got a few green plants on the windowsill, introduced a rule to bring fresh flowers for the living room, every weekend a small joy that I had not thought about before. Things started to improve at work. Freed from the constant stress, I was able to focus and even take on a new project. My colleagues noticed my zeal. A few months after the divorce, I was offered a promotion to team leader. I accepted it, feeling that I could handle it. It was an important step forward. In the evenings, I still went to the gym, and this grew from a way to forget into a stable, healthy habit. I improved my health, even lost a few extra pounds. Friends joked that free life is good for me. To some extent, they were right. I began to devote more time to myself, to my development. We still got together with Mark and Jessica, only now I came alone. At first, I felt uneasy in the company. It seemed like everyone was looking at me with pity. But my friends quickly dispelled my complexes, communicating with me like before, and I felt like one of them again. I even made a couple of new acquaintances through them. We went to concerts, went camping. Once, a large group went to Lake Michigan for the weekend. I sat by the fire under the starry sky and caught myself thinking that I felt good at that moment. The neighbors in the new apartment turned out to be friendly people. No one pestered me with unnecessary questions. They did not know me here in the past, so they accepted me simply as a new tenant. It was fresh and easy. I met a man on the floor below. He was also keen on running, and we ran together in the mornings several times. Gradually, my social circle expanded. In addition to old friends, I let new people into my life, and this filled it with meaning. And what about my heart? It was healing. The past no longer tormented me at night. Sometimes, of course, I remembered Emily. I was curious about how her fate turned out. As far as I knew, she changed jobs and moved from Milwaukee to her sister in Florida. We did not communicate, only occasionally I saw her rare updates on social networks. It seems that she, too, was trying to start over in her own way. I did not hold a grudge against her. Moreover, one day I caught myself sincerely wishing her to find her own happiness separately from me. Perhaps this was a sign that I had truly let everything go. Eventually, the day came when I realized it no longer hurt me to be alone. Loneliness was no longer an enemy. I learned to value my company, to find joy in independent decisions, and most importantly, I regained my sense of self-worth and the belief that I can build my life anew. In the long term, I did not rule out a new relationship. I am still a young man, and I wanted to believe that I would meet a person with whom I would be happy. But now I was in no hurry. If fate promises me a new love, it will come in due time. But for now, I was happy simply because I live a full life. I work, communicate, learn new things, wake up in the morning without a feeling of hopelessness. One day, already in the fall, I was sitting on a bench in the park after jogging. The leaves were turning yellow, the cobwebs of Indian summer were flying in the air. I was drinking hot coffee in a thermos and watching the sun rise over the city. And suddenly, I caught myself smiling. Just like that, for no reason. I felt good at that second. I felt a quiet, calm happiness inside my own, independent of anyone. A new life was going on as usual, and I was a part of it. And although the path to this was long and difficult, I thanked fate for the chance to start over and be myself. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.